Today, Be'ez Hashem, we're going to start a space of the Maimah in Torah Eir, and with that we'll be able to learn Be'ez Hashem today the fifth and the sixth hagaha, and which are two relatively short hagahos, and then we'll start the first of the long, very long hagahos, the seventh one. The seventh is very long, and the majority of the Maimah, the main focus of the hagahos is on this ois of the Maimah, ois base. Now I wanted to clarify a few things before we continue. We have talked in the first ois about the inyan of levushim, and we've explained, in order to understand the spheres of Atzilus, we need to understand the nefesh. In order to understand the nefesh, we need to understand the difference between the etzem nefesh and the keiches hanefesh. We explained that the keiches hanefesh are a particular type of levush, the gabi the nefesh, and it's called the levush hamiyuchat, a levush hamechubar, which is a distinctive type of levush, which is in contrast to a levush hanifrod. And we explained, we gave mashalim of begodim, legabi, the wearer of begodim. So a regular human body that wears clothes, the relationship that they have between them, the relationship a body has with jewelry, the relationship that the keiches hanefesh have with the eivari haguf, and the way that the etzem hanefesh, or let's just call it the etzem hanefesh for the moment, the etzem hanefesh relates to the keiches hanefesh. And so the very different relationships that we were describing, but in what we were trying to draw out was this notion that you can have something which is, on the one hand, a levush, and a levush indicates that the thing is not of the same muhus, it's not of the same essence, it's not of the same substance as the thing that is mislabish in it. But at the same time, it can be misachid with that thing, and they can have a very intimate relationship. And the impact of that is very profound. It's not, it enables the thing that's becoming enclosed in it to not only not be concealed, but to be revealed, to be active, to be enhanced, to be improved, to become effective. It enables the effectiveness of the thing which is mislabish in it. And that was like the nakuda of what we were trying to bring out, of the levush hamiyuchat. And that is, we weren't talking yet about the way the inyan is lamaila, and that is what's going to be what Ois Beis is talking about. That's what we were talking about in Ois Aleph. Now I wanted to bring out an important distinction that might get lost when you're thinking across these mashalim. So you have the levush of clothes, the clothes that people wear, physical clothes. So physical clothes with physical people that wear them. And then we had this idea of the levush hamiyuchad within clothes, which is the jewelry. So a physical person wears physical jewelry, and that physical jewelry has an impact on that physical person. All well and good. We're able to relate to these ideas. Then you have guf and nefesh. So nefesh is something which is not something we directly understand. It's something we're aware of aliveness, that someone's animated. We know the difference between a corpse and a living being. But broadly speaking, and as the Maimik pointed out, that the guf and the nefesh are indistinguishable from each other, because it's a levush hamiyuchat. But still, in the concept of something being a malubash and something being a malbush, if you take something which is a davar ruchni, such as the nefesh, and you take something that's a davar gashmi, like the guf, you can understand that in the relationship, there is, in all of these examples, the kli, the levush, are all physical things. Yeah? The matter gets different when we start talking about the etzem hanefesh and the keiches hanefesh. And Lamailas, we're going to talk about in this ois, more specifically, the issue of the spirits of Atzilus, the oiris and kalim of Atzilus. We call these kalim, we call them levushim. Now, when your mindset is thinking about a levush gashmi, even when it's a levush gashmi to a davar ruchni, so even in the example of the guf and nefesh, you can comprehend what it is, and it's clear the distinction between the two things. When you start talking about inyanim ruchniim, dvarim ruchniim, what do you mean? One is an oir and one is a kli. They're both oirs. Everything's an oir. Everything's a davar ruchni. Fundamentally, right? It's not. We're not talking about ruchnis and gashmis. We're talking about dvarim ruchniim. Some dvarim ruchniim we call oir, and other dvarim ruchniim we call kalim. We call it levushim. But what does that mean? What is it? How do you distinguish oir and oir? What makes one oir called oir and one oir called levush? One oir called oiris and one oir called kalim. How do we think about that? So, B'nefesh ha'adam, this question is a question that's asked in the Maimon, the Frierdiker Rebbe, in called Zeh Yoim. I think it's Zeh Yoim. Tavshin Hey. So there's a long hemshech, Rosh Hashanah Tavshin Hey, which itself is a continuation, is a hemshech to the hemshech of Shavuos Tavshin Daled, which is used on the Ayin base, on Shavuos Ayin Hey. Shavuos Ayin Hey, 5 or 6 Maimorim, very elaborate. Not all of the Maimorim, the hemshech, but Bechlolis, that it's used on that. So you have this Maimah, and it's very negay to our Inyan, by the way. But there's one ois in the second Maimah of the Rosh Hashanah Hemshech, ois Vav, which I recommend you learn, and it asks this question, and this is how it asks the question. It says like this: L'ch'eira in movim, b'mau ha'hefresh bein ha'oir v'hakli, shahar yakenim hem gam kin oiris. My umma da oir shaharotzi da oir u'lamayla b'madreg me'arotzi shebekenim. So it wants to understand this. So he gives an example that's something that we can be margish in ourselves. That we are able to have the midah of ahava. Uses the midah of ahava. So our midas ha'ava, when we experience it, we feel it in our heart, so to speak. We have this experience of feeling the emotion of love. That can come in many different forms. We can experience it in various different ways. But that's just the metzias ha'ava. The metzias ha'ava is how it manifests in the body. The midas ha'ava, the koyach b'nefesh called ava, it has levushi ha'nefesh. So sometimes it will be expressed. Sometimes it will be expressed. Just your heart will start pacing. Maybe that will be an expression. Another way is when you look starry-eyed, bistaklus, is an example. Or it could be through nishuk v'chibuk, kissing and hugging is an expression of your love. Another, it could be through dibur, you can, express it through speech. These are all various forms of the metzias ha'ava. But there's a muhus ha'ava, there's the ruchnistik ha'ava, which isn't the physical manifestation of it. That for sure, if there's a physical manifestation of the ava, there's for sure a shadish of that in ruchnis hanefesh. He's a very nice ishbrach. He says that ava shebe'etzem muhusa hine ha'ava hi klula minoyam v'choim ani'imus dike ruchnis dike varmkeit. So it has this. So if ava can be manifest in all these different formats, then similarly in the Mahusa Ava, there's also different variations. And he brings out how you can have different expressions of Ruchnis. And it gives it talks about Avas Oilam, Ava Rabba, Ava B'Tanugim, 3 different types of Ava. we've already been through in Manat a little bit, and different expressions of that ruchnius. So sometimes it can be mitzad tnuas hakelim, sometimes it can be tnuas ha'oy. That in ruchnius you have things which have different characteristics. In ruchnius itself you have different characteristics. So we've got to be, when we move over from these Mishalim Gashmiim, where sort of everything fits in its place, you move into Mishalim Ruchniim, you've got to adapt a little bit. You've got to start thinking about the components slightly differently. Because we're not, what is called Oir is an Oir. What's called Kli is also an Oir. It's Ruchnius. It's not a cup. It's not a glove. It's not, in Seichel, in your own comprehension, you need to start adapting and realizing what we're talking about. Otherwise, the Inyanim become Gushanim and they lose their Edelkeit. The Kli is a means by which the Oir is affected in a different way. Okay, that's just a brief hakdama to that. Now, another point I wanted to make before we start this is to remember what is the central sort of concern over here. The central concern over here. And it goes back a lot to sort of the Siman Chaf, which we've quoted many times. The Iyu v'chayu ichad, Iyu v'gamu ichad. How is it that the Kalim, as well as the Eiris, are all Elokus? And what do we mean when we say it's Elokus? I think one of you asked me this question. What do we mean when we say they are Elokus? Elokus is the Pshat, is their Nishtalshul. They come through a Seder Ishtalshlus all the way back to Atmas Ein Sof. They're not Nivroim.
So they can be traced.
Wait a second, listen. They are Nishtalshul. There's a Hishtalshlus that starts from Atmas Ein Sof. There's a Seder Hishtalshlus that ultimately results in the Eiris and the Kalim, not just the Eiris and the Kalim, these two types of Eiris. What are these two types of Eiris? This goes back again to the Tavshin Hey. That an Eir, the Eiris of Atzilus, we would say, is Meyuchad, right? But it has a Dveikus, which is not Nikeres, which is a strange use of the term, the way it uses it here. So Dveikus she'ein Nikeres. What do you mean it's ein Nikeres? When two things are Meyuchad, one with the other, it's not Nikah that it's two things that are Meyuchad. It talks here about three different madrigas. It talks about Hiskashrus. Hiskashrus is the lowest of the three madrigas. Because Hiskashrus is the pshat, two things that are attached. But they remain two distinct things. Dveikus, or his Achdus, is when the two things become one. So the difference between Eiris and Kalim are, the way it explains here in the Tavshin Hey, is that the Eir is the Dveikus she'ein Nikeres. You wouldn't know that that there were two things that came together. Whereas in the Kalim, it's Nikah that there are two things that came together. There's a degree of separateness, which we know goes back to its Makir, Sheir Shagvul, Sheir Shabligvul. But notwithstanding, whatever they are, whether it's Eiris, whether it's Kalim of Atzilus are Elikus, which the Pshat of Elikus means. They were Nishtalshul in a state of Ishtalshulus.
The Eiris have only the both.
Yeah? Okay. Wait a second. The Eiris bein Amoy. It's Makir. Sheir Shai. Kav goes back, the point is, if you go all the way back, we're talking Tzimtzum Arishin, Lifnei Tzimtzum Arishin, Etzem Ha'eir, Yecheles Ba'eir, Ma'eir, whatever you want to call it. At some point, there's a place where we don't call it a Makir, because that creates complexity, which we're going to also discuss. These are all things that we're going to actually unpack. But I want to just lay out at the outset, what is at stake over here? We want to we're going to try and establish that the Eiris and Kalim of Atzilus are elikus, which means they are nishtalshul in a seder v'ishtalshlus, and they're not nischadish. They're not nivroim, which are nischadish b'chinas yesh ma'ayin. There's two. There's something. There's the oiris, which are nishtalshul, and there are nivroim, which are created. From Atmas Ein Sof, who b'vadi b'keichav yichotu lahavit yesh ma'ayin. The Eibishter alone has the power and ability to create something yesh ma'ayin. And the bri yesh ma'ayin is not the o. The bri yesh ma'ayin is not the o. The bri yesh ma'ayin are the nivroim of biyah. Be'ikah in olam hazeh atachtin hagashmi. That's what that is, the creation. Everything else is a hishtalshlus. Now, we're going to have to do a lot of work to explain and understand what that means. Because as we've talked many times, what is the difference between an oir is giluyim? Oir is a giluyim, right? Giluyim is lezulas. Etzem is an atzmi, is only bishvil atzmi. Seirich atzmi. So from Atmas Ein Sof, you would think for anything to exist, anything to emerge other than Atmas Ein Sof, it has to be through Bria. The Eibush has to create it. Because how can it exist otherwise? It's not, there's no hechrich. There's no necessity for there to be oir. There's a chiddush. Sorry, well, not chiddush. There is this nakuda that the oiris and kelim v'atzilus and all the oiris, all the way back. The oir in Seif Lifnei Tzimtzum is nishtalshul al yidei tzimtzumim and is not a nivra. It was not created. A nivra is a of nifrat, right? Kilo. Oiris and kelim they're not nifradim. They're miyuchadim. They're dovuk. And they are a reflection of Elikus. They're only a ha'ara, all of the caveats and everything we're going to bring in. But b'poil the Elikus. And that's why Bohem va'al yodam Malchus Tavatzilus, ultimately you have the Bri Yesh Ma'ayin. They're able to be the means by which Atmas Ein Sof is able to be Mahava the Bri Yesh Ma'ayin al Yodam. They alone aren't able to create. But the Keach Atmas in them is able to make them create. Okay, that was very bekitza. But I just want it to be that is the framework in which we're thinking about these things. And I want to give you a few makeres for you to look up and to think about what we're talking about over here. So one mocker, I'll write them down for you later. One mocker is the second Katonti in Tofresh Ein Ches, which, and it actually even better, it's much clearer, the Inyan is much clearer. There's a Maimon of the Rebbe Katonti also from Tofshin Yud Zayin, which is on the Katonti, the second Katonti. So the Katonti Tofshin Yud Zayin.
We didn't learn like the second one.
I'm not sure if you learned it yet. I think you might not have learned it. And then there's another whole sugya, very big sugya, in the Rebbe's Torah, which is quite complicated, and I'll guide you through it. But it's very, very important, and it starts with a ha'ara of the Rebbe on Eichotzu in Ranat, where the Rebbe intimates what he's saying. I think the Inyan is already a shtickle in the Ein Ches and in the Tofshin Yud Zayin. But I have to think about a little bit exactly if there's the extent of the difference. There's a ha'ara there which I'm going to show you on Amud Ein Daled. There's the Basti Lagani of the Rebbe Tofshin Mem Hey, which is Muga and Milukot Beis. There's the Maim HaChodesh Tofshin Mem Zayin, which is also Muga in Chelik Beis. We're not doing that whole Maim. There's a few ha'aras. There's a very important ha'ara in the Chodesh Tofshin Mem Zayin which talks about this Inyan. And it's all about the Inyan. There's a Sikha of the Rebbe Pasha Zocher Tofshin Mem Hey. And all of these places, they're talking about the inyan of Tzimtzumim before Tzimtzum Arishin. And the Rebbe is being madgish, the point I'm making here, that the Oir is nishtalshul, in a seder of ishtalshulus, and not b'derech b'riyesh ma'ayin, from the Etzem. And as we go through this ois base, and we're going to spend, it's going to be a while. It's a long hagois, but we're ultimately gonna, hopefully, all of these little nuggets that I'm just throwing at you now are going to come together. It's going to give you a sense. You've also got, in this we've got a lot of stuff here from Derech Sisecha in Hamonos Alikus in East Dalad. So there's a tremendous amount going on over here. But I hope that you'll realize that it's so fundamental. I mean, we're dealing with some of the most fundamental core notions and concepts that you're gonna come across in Chassidus. And of course, you've got the Sefer Erchim in Chelik Dalet, Oiris Tziyurim Pshitusam, I can't remember. That you're, which is a whole Welt. There's a tremendous amount, and it all in a sense revolves around this sefer, these hagoys, the Ramas Basach Liyol. It's really, wherever you're going to look, wherever you're going to be ma'ayin and all these things, it's going to give you a marimakim. Where? Back to him. So I just want to give you a sense that this is opening up a massive world of haskalah, of thinking about exactly how the whole system functions, and it's kedai to appreciate it. Good. Should we start? Okay, so we're on Amud Zayin, Amud Ches, sorry, beginning of Ois Base. It's the same thing we said above regarding the Keichas HaNefesh, Legabi the Nefesh. Similarly, too, we say with regards the Esespheres of Atzilus, which are also called Tikkunin. V'hainu Chachma Umides, the Atzilus, the Iyu V'gamui Chad, Avu Biyah, Him Bechinas Levushim Mamish. So the term Tikkunin, which is a special term for a particular type of Levush, a Levush HaMyuchad, applies to the Esespheres of Atzilus, meaning Chachma and Mides. Chachma Mides meaning Seichel Mides, yeah. That on all of them we say Iyu V'gamui Chad, they are Miyuchad. When it comes to Biyah, they are treated like the Levushim, Mamish, like Levushim Nifradim, which are Mailam or Master on Elikus. Nearly, it appears to me that Hakavonahu by a hefresh ben Kalim da Atzilus le Kalim da Esespheres de Biyah. What it means to say over here, what it appears to the Rebbe Rashab is that the important distinction it's making over here between Atzilus and Biyah is specifically between the Kalim of Atzilus and the Kalim of Biyah. That in Atzilus the Kalim are absolutely Elikus, like we're going to explain. That's why they're Levushim Yuchadim, because they're Elikus. And that's why they're Megala the Oir. And that's why they're called Tikkunim. But the Kalim of Biyah, they are Bechinas Nivra. They are Yesh Nivra. Because Akejus of Nechav, Timasu Ivagam Ichad, Vezel Shoinei, Bini Reishis, Hayesh, Hanivra, Tchilosei, Hein HaKalim, the Yutzfiris, the Biyah, Chuliat Kanasheni. So the emphasis is on the Kalim. What it's trying to distinguish over here is between the Kalim. Im Kain, Harim Levushim Nifradim. If the beginning of Yeshus, of the Yesh Nivra, are the Kalim of Biyah, therefore they are Levushim Nifradim Mamish. V'Elikus Bahem, B'Bechinas Helam V'Hester. And the Elikus which is within them is in a state of Helam V'Hester. Helam V'Hester Habayrim in Nivra. In the state of where the Creator is hidden from its creation. And that's why they are able to utterly conceal that which is mislabish in them. And they are not do not have this achdus like you have in Atzilus. The bebriya lav ihu v'chayui v'gamu ichad. What does it say then, Hakdama? That they're not in a state of achdus like it is in Atzilus. Kamoi ba'Atzilus, da kelim yuchadim ma'ir, where the kelim are meyuchad with the ay. Masha en kem b'yahin nifradim, whereas in the case of biyah, they're nifradim. So what he's clarifying that the discussion over here is all about the kelim. It's not about the oir. We're going to talk about that more. No, I'm going to hold that for now. If you remember, right at the beginning of the Maimah, he also said a very similar point. He made it clear that he meant the kelim. This is actually in the Maimah, in the Alter Rebbe's Maimah. He writes there, "Aval haseich v'amidas ima yoyishem bechinas levushim einam levushim nifradim mamish ela k'moi bechinas kelim da atzilus the iu v'gamu ichad." Emphasizes talking about the kelim. That's the lashon of the Alter Rebbe in the Maimah. So we're referring to the kelim. We're not talking about the eris at the moment. Good. That's the end of the 5th hagaha. He says just a short, quotes a few lines, few words from the Alter Rebbe. V'alehem omar levushim tekinas loin. And regarding them, meaning the Esdras of Atzilus, it says about them.
I've already
read that, no? What are you reading?
After that, God, isn't he referring to the Esdras of Biyah?
Sorry, I will be in beginners levushim mamish, but I'm levushim tekinas loin. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Lashon tekinas, but still levushim. Fine.
Forget about that.
No, that's what the next hagaha talks about. It says tekinas. Yeah. So he questions this. Why in biyah does it also say tekinas? So now we're going to the hagaha vav.
Wasn't the first hagaha we just read in the middle of the parenthesis?
In the middle of the
Yes.
parentheses, yeah.
Do you know what that is?
Ended in a while.
Yeah, we're not going to get to the end of that parenthesis for a while.
Who wrote these parentheses?
Yeah, I don't know. Okay, so V'aleim Amma Levushim Tekinas Loin. So regarding the Levushim of Biyah, the Kelim of Biyah, they are called Levushim. They were established Levushim. Says the Rebbe, V'lichayra tzarich lahavin v'aloi gam kan Amma Levushim Tekinas Loin. Hari Amma behen Loshen Tikkun. We've just said there's a major distinction between Levushim Nifradim, Levushim Yuchadim, and we use the term Tikkunim when we're talking about Levushim Yuchadim. But seemingly in the Pasuk Eliyahu, it refers to the Levushim Nifradim of the Kelim of Biyah, also in the Lashon Tikkun. Yesh loima dekan ukumoi ata achinoi samoi vashamesh betirgam at iskinta ein b'meturgam erich tikken kumoi kein kan yesh loima hachana. So it teaches this pasuk in Tilim that you prepared tikkun miloshin prepared hachinoisa. So when we say levushim tekinas loin, means you prepared. These are the levushim which you prepared. Yeah, right. Rather than loshin tikkun, as in tachshit, loshin fixing. Yeah.
Doesn't even make sense in the words.
Gam yesh leima the mashakos levushim tekinas loin. Hainu lahakelim the esesferes da atzilus chuli kanal. I made the mistake. I was thinking about the hagaha that the levushim tekinas loin also refers to the kelim of the esesferes da atzilus. Mipdei shebichtei liyosis haves hayesh mamish hu alidei alavushim hanal davke. So in order there can be the Metzias Yesh, it has to come through the Levush in the Kalim of Atzilus, specifically, and the whole ultimate kavanah, the whole Seder Shalshus was that there should be a Savas Hayesh. So it also used Lashon Tkinas because it fulfills the ultimate purpose of creation. But nevertheless, predominantly, mainly, to be understood that when it comes to the Kalim of Biyah, they are Levushim Nifradim. But Lachein Amma Levushim, Tkinas Chuli, Veloikum Megabi Kalim Datzilus, the Amma Antu Da Pikas Asati Kunin. So even if you're going to say that Tkinas is Miloshin Tikun, is Levushin Tkinas. It's not the same as saying Apikas Asati Kunin. The Shem HaEtzem Hu Tikun. When it comes to the Kalim of Atzilus, the actual Shem HaEtzem, what they're called, their noun, their name is Tikun. וגם אחר כך אומר וכמה גוף in תקינס להם. מה שאין כן כאן אומר לבושין תקינס להם. ואחר כך אומר סתם לגבי לבושין דמחסיין חלי. So if you look in the Lashon of the Pasuk Eliyahu, you can see a clear distinction between the way it's using the terminology legabi the Kalim of Atzilus, the way it's using it legabi the Kalim of Biyah. And clearly says, stam after legabi levushin de mechasyon. It doesn't say levushin tkunin tkinas whatever. It ignores the whole tkinas. So there you have a much clearer elaboration of that distinction.
So three explanations basically here.
Go on.
First explanation is that is from
Lashon
Lashon
Hafana.
Hafana. Second one that it means
It's also a reference to the Kalim of Atzilus.
and the third one over here that
It's not the Shema Atzilus.
right, and then we also talk about that is the real kavana, is tikkun Hashem for really. Hashem the kavana al yena is bishvil is hasa yesh.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. So he sort of resolves that seeming problem. Yeah. Now back to the Maimah of the Alter Rebbe. Ki hine anthu chakim. Yeah, we say that in the Pasuk Eliyahu, that you are a chacham. Pirush anthu hainu eirin seif. Who is the ant? Who is the you over here? The you is the eir ein seif. And chakim shenimshach bebechinas chachma. Al derech b'mokim shata meitza gudei lasei chuli. We say that the place where do you find his greatness, there you find his humility, that the Eibishter was metamtim himself to be nimshach in bechinas chachma. Va'adayin einay chakim b'chachma yidiyah. But it's still not the notion of chachma the way we know what chachma to mean. Ela shenikra chakim, rather it's called a chakim, the fishu mekeir ha-chachma, umimenu hamshachas ha-chachma biyah. It serves as a mokir for chachma, but it isn't chachma as we know it in biyah. Now I want to say something here. We talk about the spheres of Atzilus, and we broadly we have there are basically three stages or three chalukos of the spheres of Atzilus. You have Seichel, you have Midas, and you have Malchus. Yeah, Seichel, Midas, and Malchus. And because we have Seichel, we have Midas, and we have Malchus, which I'll talk about in a second. What we mean by when we have Malchus, why we call it Malchus. And it's through our understanding of these things, so through our Chachma Yediyah, what we know what Chachma is, we then extrapolate and we figure out what Chachma Vatzilus is. So we have to make a clarification. You Antu Chakim Taka, this is the Mekeira Chachma. But it's not Chachma Yediyah. It's nothing. It's not within the context of being teifus, being masig, anything. Doesn't understand anything. There's no understanding in Atzilus. There's no chachma in Atzilus. There's no bin in Atzilus. There's a mokir of what we call chachma, and so therefore we also call the mokir chachma. But the mokir is not chachma. It's not chachma as we know it. Mechaker, what is the difference between Seichel and Midas? The difference between Seichel and Midas is the extent to which, in us, because we're not talking about Natsilis. What are we, sort of when we're being mafshit, the inyan of Chochmah? We only know Chochmah, we know what is Chochmah. Chochmah is the ability to comprehend concepts. In the human mind, the way the Seichel is mislabish in the Guf, in the Mayach, is to understand a physical thing, right? So, it's not that. So what is the Mahus of Chochmah? What is the Mahus of Seichel? What is the fundamental idea of Seichel that makes this a mocker for it? In what ways it's misyachis to it? If it's nishtalshul from it, then it must have some element of what makes it, gives it a yachas. What is the yachas? So Seichel, in contrast to Midas, is the extent to it relates to the thing outside of it. So by contrast, Seichel is usually depicted as something which is kar velach. It's very cold. It's very detached. So a person can understand something, but it doesn't necessarily affect them. And all the things every single name of the spirit, Seichel isn't atzmai, because the Seichel is you're thinking about something chutz la'atzmai. You're thinking about a dava sheni, a dava zulas. You're comprehending, even if it's an abstract thing, still a Seichel. The Seichel is not you. It's not like you're thinking about yourself. When a person engages their Seichel, they're thinking about something else. Dava zulas. But then the point is that the person doesn't become nitfas, doesn't become attached to the thing that they're comprehending necessarily. Don't have to. They can remain detached. It's not negeya to themselves. Whereas Midas is, to a greater extent, is negeya. There is a spilus about the thing also. So the midas are ava. So you have ava for a particular thing. So the thing that you have ava to affects you in a far greater degree than the seichel had an effect. The devar seichel, the muskal, had on the maskil, on the chishev, on the chacham. So you have a chacham and you have an oyev. What is the impact of the devar seichel on the chacham, and what is the impact of the nehav on the oyev? So you say that is the difference. That is the core difference between seichel and midas. And then when it comes to malchus, which we say malchus, the inyan of dibur is mamash in ganz nicht vil azulas. It's not the pshat. The person has dibur, which is a keich atzmi. So it's their own personal ability to speak. They're their own inner dialogue or something. And then suddenly when there's somebody else, they think about them. It's not the same like, because a person can be an ish, can have avo, can be a person who is a loving person, even if there isn't a dovazulas. Right? They can have that midah. But the koyach hadibur, kol kulei, in kol inyonei is bishvil azulas. Like we said in Luvar Rava Ranat. Right? That is the whole point of dibur. It's the way that your whole self is entirely nitfas in the zulas. When you're talking about, so these are the core issue, the core things in a human being that we understand. Seichel, midas, dibur, shava dibur, whatever I'm saying. But this is how we perceive it. So when you go to Atzilus and you say there's chachma, we don't mean there's chachma. We don't mean that. What we mean is that there's an Eireliki which isn't affected by the Dovazulas, and we call that Madrega Seichel. when it is affected to a greater degree, we call it midas, and it's entire when it is actually affected by when it gets to the point where it's shaykh al azulas, we call that malchus. But we're not saying chacham. Okay, it's chachma. I have chachma. The Eibush has chachma. That's the Eibush. And the Eibush wants to have chachma. The Eibush wants to understand a concept. He uses chachma b'atzilus. Chachma b'atzilus is not about understanding concepts. It's got nothing to do with chachma. It's a mocker. Why is it a mocker of chachma? Because the core inyan of chachma is there, and so it can be a mocker for chachma. You understand? That's when we say antu chakim.
There's no relation to any specific middle.
Antu chakim play b'chachma yidiyah. What we is in if you it's just not chachma. It's not chachma as we understand it. It's v'loy b'chachma yidiyah. You got to take the inyan of seichel and the inyan of midas and the inyan of malchus and understand that at its core what it fundamentally is. It's about an eireliki. There's an eireliki which is dovak in its ma'ir. It's an expression of elikus, and in the Gimel Rishonos of Atzilus and the Seichel of Atzilus, we're talking about an eireliki which is entirely sort of mufshat, entirely detached from any sense of azulas.
So how does Malchus to Chochmah Atzilus, which is how Chochmah is pure to other things?
That's why Taka. That's why you have that. We don't. When we're talking about Chochmah Atzilus, we're not talking about the. We're always talking about the Malchus to Chochmah Atzilus. Because you have to. Because mitzad atzmai, mitzad Chochmah to Chochmah, there's nothing to talk about. It's only when you have Malchus to Chochmah, there's something. Every single thing has to be brought out. That's not, well. We're talking in Kalim.
What the Kalim is?
We're talking about the Eiros and Kalim together. Not
Surely
talking
it's
about
talking about a characteristic that isn't megalit to other things. It's an atzmi, and that's why it's called Chochmah.
But what did it mean? It's not megalit. It's other things.
It's irrelevant.
It can think about.
So you're thinking about seichel. You're thinking about the difference between seichel and midas. That seichel is a private thing, something you do to yourself. Whereas midas is something you do to somebody else. That's one distinction. Fair enough. But so it's an own which is not in a state of hispashtus. Put it that way. Lahazulas. It's one way of looking at it. I was bringing out a more. What I was trying to articulate was how, in truth, everything is, once we're talking about in koiches, in kalim, we're talking about things, relationships to other things. Seichel has a relationship with when we're talking the moshel, we're not talking about Atzilus now. Seichel, a human seichel, has a relationship. You can say it's la'atzmei, but it's not. At the same time, it's got a relationship with the muskel, which is a davazulas. But it's able to remain detached from that muscle, even whilst it's being thinking about it, trying to understand it.
Like a levush that's nifra. It's a levush, but it's separate.
Yeah.
Because it's separate from it, then what?
No, because if you bring out a difference in seichel and midas, and your seichel is la'atzmi, midas is lezulase. Just not as much lezulase as dibur is, because you can still have those midas afterwards. That's one way of doing it. But you can actually say that all three categories, and you can analyze them all in the way they relate to azulas. They all relate to azulas in a certain way, but they relate differently. And therefore, when we're trying to understand the muhus of these madregas of seichel, midas, and dibur, seichel, midas, and malchus in atzilus, it's just a more consistent way of thinking about them. But nothing wrong in what you said. But that's what we're saying. Antu chakim v'loi b'chachmi yediyah.
So all the spheres of Atzilus, just it's not Chachma, it's not Bina, it's not Das. They have the characteristics of Chachma, the characteristics of Bina. That's
they have they have a characteristic of the mohus of those things.
Not the megashistic of Bina. The way Bina is bisrachvus, the Ur is also bisrachvus, so to speak. It's less bottled than the Ur of Chachma. Not that there's anything to do with Bina and Chachma, b'chlal.
Just like
Well, no, because the point is, why is it nishtal? The esakech, like it's in Perek Gimel Tanya, the esakech and everything nishtal shul mayhem. So we take in Chachma, you have these qualities, but the way that it's discussion in the human experience, it's something which is completely not present. It's more about the mahus of these qualities, and we get the mahus of those qualities. And that's how our seichel and midas and our malchus is also like that.
Just like it says in the number of places about the red apples from Chesed, and the green apples from Gvura. Now we're not going to try and say that green and red is Chesed and Gvura. We're not trying to say sweet taste is an inyan of something which has a certain effect on the person when they eat it. That effect is.
I think that's just the whole point about being mafshit in yonim gashmiyusam, and so it makes clear that antu chakim avalei b'chachmi yediyah. And that's nikra chakim if you should makeir hachachim mena hamshachas chachmi b'biyah. Okay, let's start Hagah Zayin, and we're not going to finish Hagah Zayin because Hagah Zayin goes on for many pages. I'm actually not sure in this edition. I can't remember where it finishes, but it's a while. I'll look it up and let you know next year. The Vayla, we're going to go to the end of the paragraph, hopefully, on Amud Yud. So that will be the. So we'll introduce what the topic of this Hagah is going to try and talk about. The Hinei. Nispoile il the essence for Atzilus nikroim tikunim shemasaknim as We explained above that the spheres of Atzilus are called tikunim because they improve and enhance the oir. Umagalim oisoi lifel pu'ulosoi bazulas, and enable it to be unplugged, to become revealed, to become active, and affect azulas. V'hainu. The Olam HaAtzilus hu memutza bein Eirin Seif la Olam Isbiya. Olam HaAtzilus is an intermediary between Eirin Seif and the Olam Isbiya. The B'chtei sheyeh me Eirin Seif Olam Isbiya shehem nivroim mugbolim mamish, to get from Eirin Seif to have Olam Isbiya which are finite and contained creations. And how do you get from the Eirin Seif, which is Bligvul? So we have Eirin Seif. Eirin Seif Geshmeikein Hu, it's Ein Seif, Bligvul. So if the Kavanah Elyon is what, there should be Nivroim Mugbolim, typified in Olam Isbiya. So how do you transition from Bligvul to Gvul? The way you do that is through Olam HaAtzilus. In Olam HaAtzilus, the Oy, which is Bligvul, is able to be contained in different spheres, which is a Hagbala, right? If it's Chachma, it's not Bina. If it's Chesed, it's not Gvura. So the Gilui of the Oir achieved by the Kalim of Atzilus into these Esespheres Muchulakim is the means by which the Eirin Seif Abligvul is able to transition to create Eilamis Mugbalim. If we're talking about Gilu Eir, if the Kalim are able to be Megala the Eir in an Oifen of Chachma, or the Kalim are able to be Megala the Eir in an Oifen of Chesed, that distinctive tziyur that each one of them has is, to a certain extent, some type of Hagbola. V'lachein nikroim b'shem Sfiros, that's why they're called Sfiros, Loshen Behirus, brightness. The Hainushim Megalim as a Eir, because they are Megala, Einem Bechinas Levushim Hamastir Mechli Kanal. The function of the Kalim of Atzilus is not to be Mailim or master on the Eir, like Levushim Nifrodim, but to be Megala the Eir. That's why the Kalim of Atzilus are called Spheres, because they cause that the Eir Ein Sof should be boy. There should be a brightness and a shining of the Eir Ein Sof. V'gam Loshen Mispar. So you have these two elements. On the one hand, it's being Megala, but through the act of Gilui, it's also an act of Hagbola, because Spheres is also Miloshin Mispar of amount, a measure.
How is it Megala any more than it was Megala previously? How would it going into a Kili make it more Bahir prior to doing so?
The marshal we gave was how the Keiches HaNefesh and the Mislabish in the Guf HaNefesh, they become active. Yeah. So it says there in Yetz Chaim that the spheres of Atzilus, the Kalim of Atzilus, have a Bechina of Gvul and Midah. Well, das HaPardas, Einam bebechinas Gvul Mamish, so we're not talking about Gvul as we just, so we aren't talking about Chachma v'Chachma Yediyah. We're not talking about Gvul in the context of Eilumas Nivraim and Mugbalim. But Legabi, the Eir Ein Sof, which is Pashut, they're called Gvul. V'yesh leima the Hainu Kanal. Sha'akli magbil is ha'Eir, the function of the Kli is to facilitate, like in the Rav who's Mashpia, the Talmud. The Kli enables, there can be a Gilui which is Shaykh to the Mekabel. Shalule HaKli, inimetzat etzem ha'Eir, eine begede Gilu v'Islam sheba Mekabel. Because with it not to be a Kli, the Eir itself is not in a state of Gilui. Remember, Etzema Oir, here we're talking about, again, it's Lefi Erech, but we're talking about Oir, the Etzema Oir, before it's mislabish in the Kli, is not in a state of Gilui, it's not in a state of Shaykhas El Azulas, and therefore can't communicate. It's in a state of, you can say, it's a state of an aliyah. It's not in a state of hashbo and amshacha. But by means of coming enclosed in those esespheres, it comes into the kingdom of Atzilus in a particular kli, be it chachma, be it chesed. It enables it to be, with time, with many more tzimtzumim and pasais and different things, a mocker, a weiter mocker, but a mocker nevertheless of the chachrin chesed that's going to be banifrain. This is the sort of the memutza between the Eir Ein Sof Abrigable and the Eilumis Mugbalim. V'nimtza. So based on this we can conclude. B'chinas eses first atzilus ein b'chinas yirida v'tzimtzum Eir ha'atzmus liyes b'chinas chachma v'chesed begilu. That the Eir Ein Sof becomes mutzumtzum through an act of tzimtzum. The Eir ha'atzmus is able to be nimshach and be mislabish in the kalim of chachma and chesed begilu. V'zeu shemavai l'kamon inyan ha'atzilus. Yeah. Kamei atzilus ruchi shal Moshe al shivim zkenim. B'chdei liyois b'chinas chachma v'chesed b'biyachuli. Yeah, that's our first nimtza. That the Eir Ein Sof is nistamtim, mislabish and essence versus atzilus, and that enables it to be able to be, enables that to be the inyan of chachma and chesed and biyah. So it may be an intermediary between the Eir and Seif and the Nivroim. But we have to understand that there is a huge there's a huge distance and difference and distinction between Eilam Atzilus and Eilam Abriya. Because Atzilus is still what we call Elikus. Whereas Bria is an inyan of Yeshus. The Sham in Bria, Harunikra is Chachma Yediyah. The Chachma of Bria can be called a Chachma Yediyah. You don't have the same Gilu Eir that you have in Atzilus. The Arim Bechinas Eir and Seif Hamatzel Meir Sham Bechinas Gilu Mamish, because in Atzilus the Eir and Seif is Meir Begilu Mamish, whereas in Eilam Abriya it's already Levush Nifradim, it's already Mailim Master. Nikra Atzilus Elikus, and that's why we call Atzilus Elikus. Mishkos Mokim Acher Moshul Lezem is Pashas Ha'anofim Mei Ha'ilon Shehem Nikroim Ayin Legabi Atzim Elon. So the branches that come out of a tree are not the substance of the tree. The trunk of the tree is what counts. And the same is true of all things which are just an expression, an offshoot, an outpouring of the substance of something. But the branches are part of the tree. So that's, in Atzilus, it's like a tree. You might say that the Kalim of Atzilus are not really Eir and Seif, but they're Dovuk in Eir and Seif. They're Kalim Yuchadim, they're Dvukim, and that Dvekus makes it still considered to be Elikus. So, K'moikim Muven Mashim Evayakan Inyan Atzilus, Me Atzilus Ruchi Shal Meisha Al Shivim Zkenim. Sha'aruach sha'aleim u'bechinas ha'aras ruchi shal meishem mamish. Mishpoile kamon bepirush v'atzalti v'samti chuli sha'oirid v'amshich bechinas shal chali yes lamatim madrigoscha. So this is why Atzilus, the term Atzilus, is understood from the inyan of Moshe, separating from his ruach onto the Shivim Zkenim, that it was actually that his ruach, the ha'ara of his ruach of Moshe, they need each and every one of them. So there's the inyan of oirid v'amshich, that the actual oir is nimshach. It's taka a tzimtzum, it's taka a yirida, but it's still the thing itself. So what is our second v'nimtza? The ba'atzilus hariya aris einu seif meir megilu mamish ad the iyu v'chayu ichad. So there are 2 points that we've tried to make in this first part of the 7th hagaha. One is that the Eir and Seif is bligvul, and the Kelim of Atzilus are the mumutza to enable the Eir and Seif bligvul to be able to create Eilamus Mukbalim of Eilamus Biyah. So, and the way that is done is by the Eir being mislabish in the Kelim of the spheres of Chochmah or of Chesed. It enables it to be a Gilui of Eir and Seif as Chochmah and as Chesed. So when the Eir and Seif is Niskala, before the Eir and Seif is mislabish in the Kelim of Atzilus, it's Eir and Seif is Poshut. Hasn't got any Hagbala. It's Bligvul. Now, this Bligvul is Meir al Yidei HaKelim in a manner of Chachma, or in a manner of Chesed. Still Bligvul in one way, but it has a Gevissa Hagbala. The gewisse Hagbala is the Ein Sof can manifest as Chachma, can manifest as Chesed. Al derech in our moshel. We are not bringing the moshel here, but al derech in our moshel. The nefesh, when it's mislabish in the body, it's able to be nisgale in these inyanim. It's the nefesh which is it's not the brain that has chachma. The nefesh has chachma, and that aspect of the nefesh is only able to because of the levusham yuchad of the guf, or even higher. The etzema nefesh is mamish poshut, and it's only the keiches nefesh of chachma and chesed where the nefesh is able to be nisgale. But it's all a gilui of the nefesh. Similarly, there's a gilui of Ein Sof in a manner of chachma, in a manner of chesed, in a manner, in all the different, which is a gewisse hagbala. So that's our first thing, and that enables it to become a mokid, like in still with many tzimtzumim to come to Eilam Esbiyah, which is the whole goal. That's number one. Number two, that there is a fundamental difference between Atzilus and Biyah. That just because Atzilus is a mamutza between Ein Sof and Biyah, don't think that Biyah is in somehow and Atzilus have some type of comparability. They're incomparable. Atzilus is a likus because the Ein Sof is misyachitz sham with the kalim and is mei begilu mamish. There's a gilu of Ein Sof. It's not. There's no yeshus. Everything is bottle. Everything is dovuk. And there's no hafrada. It's Eilam ha'achdus. Whereas Eilam Esbiyah, Eilam alma de prudin. Eilam es nefradim. So there's we don't be mistaken to think when you talk about mamutza. So mamutza usually means a little bit of this and a little bit of that. There is still a clear distinction between what is Atzilus and what is Biyah. Atzilus is still a likus. And remember what I said at the beginning. What is a likus? What do we mean by a likus? It's nishtalshul in a state of ishtalshulus. L'mayla adam kids. They're not nivroim nifradim. They're nishtalshul, and that's why they're still called elikus. Okay. So we've only just warmed up. We got into this. I want to just give a little bit of a hakdama also about what we're going to do next. There's quite a lot to learn in preparation for what we're doing next.
Just say one thing. It seems that the Eitz Chaim and the Pardes aren't arguing with each other. They're just explaining to him. The Pardes just explains the point further. Because we also the Eitz Chaim would agree there's not.
Yeah.
It's all relative.
Yeah. We're going to enter into a major sugya in the next paragraph, which is the sugya of the different shittas about when we say spheres, what do we actually mean? When we say spheres, do we mean the kalim of Atzilus? When we say spheres, do we mean the Eiros of Atzilus? Or when we say spheres, do we mean the Eiros and the kalim of Atzilus? And there are gimel shittas. There are three shittas. That's the famous Maimon that Samach Tzedek, Drush Gimel Shittas in Eiratir in Yonim, and which the Rebbe quotes in Bosel Legani Tafshin Yud Aleph, and this is and probably the best collation of it all is in the Sefer Erchem, which goes into in huge detail, and it's a very big and complicated sugi which we're going to get our teeth into. And I will give you, but it's also in what you've already learned in the Harmonos Elikus, Perek Dalet. So it might be worth doing a chazar of that because you're already familiar with that. But we're going to talk about it a lot here, so I'm not sure you need to do too much looking around. But just to get you prepared, that's what we're going to get into. So I would like you to look over that ois in the Tafshin Hey. I found it very useful in understanding that. I think that Katointi, the second Katointi in Ein Ches, and or or more specifically the Kartonti Toshin Yud Zayin, are also very useful. You can cut out the beginnings and ends, just get the point about what we're talking about over here. And it explains it nice and clearly about how you have the emergence of Oir, how it's shaykh that Oir emerges. And it will give you a much better feel about this inyan of white called Elikus. Okay? Enjoy.